Welcome to the first season of the Ecologies of Danger podcast. Ecologies of Danger is a project produced by the students of a course on environmental security at Colgate University. In this season of the podcast, we look at the different ways in which the environment has become a security issue. In this episode, KArmo reveals the complicated environmental dimensions of the civil war in Syria.
Disturbing photos of dead children and overflowing refugee boats have been splashed across media reports on the Syrian crisis for years. Such suffering makes the beginning of the 6-year conflict seem rather trivial. Still, in order to fully understand the crisis, we must explore the factors that sparked the Syrian war. One of these critical but often overlooked components? A severe drought, the worst in Syria in 900 years. Syria has a semi-arid climate, so drought is not out of the ordinary. But from 2006 to 2010, Syria endured a drought almost unprecedented in its severity and length. Climatologists have tied the drought to climate change. And when combined with existing societal issues, the drought helped push Syria to a tipping point. Here's what happened. Farmers in Syria are heavily dependent on natural rainfall, as modern irrigation systems are limited. As the drought went on, yields of wheat and barley plummeted. Food prices surged. Crop imports from countries such as Russia became increasingly crucial. So when President Putin imposed a temporary ban on grain exports after a heatwave devastated Russia's wheat crop in 2010, Syria was in trouble. Food insecurity rapidly escalated. Bad government policies only worsened food and water shortages. Back in the 1970s, President Hafez al-Assad began a campaign for agricultural self-sufficiency. Loans to drill wells and install pumps became easily accessible and cheap thanks to subsidies. Unfortunately, this depleted groundwater sources. In 2000, Hafez al-Assad's successor and son, President Bashar al-Assad, privatized state lands. This led to a rapid increase in commercial farming and further exhausted Syria's water supply. Though mostly well-intentioned, water policies continued to backfire. For example, Assad expanded irrigation systems throughout rural areas to decrease dependency on rainwater. The unanticipated result? More pressure on local water resources and the salinization of farmland. When the drought struck, the mismanagement of agricultural policies continued. Subsidies and price controls on fuel, pesticides, and animal feed were cut to save money, causing further distress to rural farmers. A Syrian family currently taking refuge in Turkey commented on the regime's negligence.
We used to own farmland in Syria. The rains were very good, and all the land was well watered. And then suddenly, the drought occurred. The land became like a desert, a salt wasteland. We spoke out about the drought, saying the government must help, but no one gave a damn.
The severity of the drought and the lack of government assistance displaced many farmers, fishermen, and herdsmen. Many relocated to urban areas in hopes of securing a new livelihood to support their family. Syria's urban areas weren't equipped with the infrastructure or services necessary to accommodate this influx. 1.2 million Iraqis were already in Syria seeking refuge from the Iraq War. An influx of foreign investment in real estate and the elimination of rent control made affordable housing nearly impossible to find. City peripheries became increasingly rife with overcrowded and illegal settlements. Rates of unemployment, crime, and inequality soared. Anger with the Assad regime began to reach a boiling point.
If we are in pain, that's God's will. But if God puts someone in charge of you and they turn their back, you're going to scream and say, I'm hungry. Then if no one listens, you get upset. All of this happened to us. That's why we started the revolution. It's a revolution of freedom and a revolution of hungry people.
That was Abu Khalil, a former cotton farmer who today commands a group of farmers-turned-rebel fighters. Some of the earliest protests began in Dara, a rural farming town. By 2011, Dara had suffered from intense water scarcity, and many farmers had already been displaced. Dexter Filkins, a reporter from The New Yorker who specializes in the Middle East, reports that the Assad regime's brutal response to the nonviolent protests in Dara was a triggering factor to the war. Filkins recalls a story that demonstrates how the brutal government crackdowns transitioned the peaceful protests in Syria to an all-out war.
There's a famous anecdote of a young boy who was taken away, tortured, and mutilated, and then his corpse was dumped on the front steps of his family's home. And that's probably the best explanation we have, which is that the middle ground has been taken away, and it very rapidly became a fight to the death.
The Civil War officially erupted in March of 2011. In 2016, just 4 years later, the humanitarian crisis is a global catastrophe. 13.5 million Syrians are in need of humanitarian assistance. 6 million have been internally displaced by violence, and 5 million have fled the country. The prolonged and severe drought experienced by Syria from 2006 to 2010 was not the single cause of the war. But it can be traced to the aggravation of existing economic and social instabilities. Causing the death of livestock and the failure of crops, the drought led to the displacement of farmers and mass migration into already overcrowded cities. The poverty and inequality already present throughout much of Syria was harshly amplified. The Syrian government's history of misguided water policies only contributed to the intensity of the scarcity. Bashar al-Assad's repressive regime and brutal responses to peaceful civilian protests enraged thousands. Former U.S. National Security Advisor Susan Rice powerfully summed up the compounding factors that contributed to the Syrian crisis.
Where there is drought, where there is insecurity, when there is poverty, hunger, poor governance, repressive policies, it may make the tinder in the box more readily ignitable.
Crises like the Syrian conflict may become more common with climate change. However, we must avoid foisting the entirety of the blame upon these climactic events. The drought wasn't the only match that lit the tinderbox that is Syria. Instead, we must remain vigilant about the interaction between environmental, social, political, and economic systems. This is KArmo reporting from Colgate University.